Warning: this story contains extreme violence, slasher elements, and murder. I encourage you to listen to the entire story, and if you enjoy this type of content, please subscribe and press the bell icon to stay updated. I never fit in. Not in school, not at home, not anywhere. I was always the outcast, the one they whispered about, the one they mocked. Every day was a nightmare, every breath a reminder that I didn't belong. They pushed me, taunted me, tormented me until I couldn't take it anymore. I told myself it didn't matter, that their words were just air. But deep down, their cruelty festered, grew like a cancer, spreading through my mind until I couldn't think of anything but them. They had no idea what they were creating. It started with voices. Whispers in the back of my mind, soft at first, barely noticeable, but then louder, more insistent. They told me things, dark things, things I would never have imagined on my own. They showed me how to make it stop, how to end the pain, and so I planned. The night of the school dance, I waited. The gym was packed with sweaty bodies, everyone lost in the music, in their laughter. No one noticed me slip out, unnoticed as always. But this time, I wasn't invisible. I had a purpose. I had a mission. In the locker room, I opened the duffel bag I'd hidden there earlier that day. Inside was everything I needed: the knife, long and gleaming, the rope, the duct tape. My heart raced as I thought about what I was going to do, about the terror I would finally unleash. They were all going to pay. I started with the weakest, the one who had never done anything to me directly but had laughed along with the others. Amy, sweet, innocent Amy. She was in the bathroom, fixing her makeup, oblivious to the doom that was about to descend. I slipped in behind her, quiet as a shadow, and before she could even turn around, I grabbed her by the hair, yanking her head back. Her scream was cut short by the blade slicing across her throat, the blood spurting out in a hot rush, covering my hands, my face. It was beautiful, in a way, the way her life drained out of her, the way her eyes went wide with shock and horror. I left her there, a crimson smile etched into her neck, and moved on to the next one. Mark was in the hallway, texting on his phone, completely oblivious. He was the ringleader, the one who had started it all. I hated him the most. He deserved what was coming. I crept up behind him, the knife still wet with Amy's blood, and plunged it into his back, again and again, feeling the blade sink into flesh, hearing his cries of pain and surprise. He tried to fight back, but I was too quick, too strong. I slammed his head into the wall, over and over, until the life left his body. 2 down, more to go. I moved through the school like a ghost, picking them off one by one. No one saw me coming. No one knew who or what was killing them. They ran, they screamed, but it was no use. I was always one step ahead, always there, waiting in the shadows. The halls were slick with blood, the air thick with the scent of death, but it wasn't enough. It would never be enough. I needed them to understand, to feel the fear I had felt every day, every hour, every minute of my miserable existence. I wanted them to know that this was their fault, that they had created the monster that was now hunting them down. In the end, there were only a few left. The ones who had been too scared to bully me directly, the ones who had stood by and done nothing. They were huddled together in the gym, crying, praying, hoping for a miracle, but there were no miracles that night. I walked into the gym, covered in blood, the knife still in my hand. They saw me and screamed, but it was too late. I was on them in seconds, slashing, stabbing, reveling in their terror. Their blood splattered the walls, the floor, my face. It was pure ecstasy, the culmination of everything I had ever wanted, everything I had ever dreamed of. When it was over, when they were all dead, I stood there, surrounded by the carnage I had wrought. It was quiet now, the only sound my ragged breathing, the only movement the slow drip of blood from the blade in my hand. I had done it. I had finally done it, but as I stood there, I realized something. The voices hadn't stopped. They were still there, still whispering, still urging me on. I had thought this would be enough, that the blood would silence them, but I was wrong. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough, and so I left the school, the knife still in my hand, the voices still in my head. There were more out there, more who deserved to die, more who needed to feel the terror, the pain. And I would find them, one by one, I would find them all, and when I did, I would make them pay. The town was in shock. What had happened at the school was unspeakable. A massacre that left the community reeling. The media called it the midnight slaughter, but they didn't know the half of it. They saw the blood, the bodies, the aftermath. But they didn't see me. I was a ghost, a phantom slipping through the cracks of society, lost in a sea of faces. They didn't know who I was, and they didn't know that I wasn't done, not yet. The whispers were louder now, more urgent, more demanding. They told me to keep going, to finish what I'd started. The dance was just the beginning, a warm-up. The real work was still ahead, the real terror still to come. I knew I couldn't stay in town. The police were on high alert, searching for any clue, any sign of the monster responsible. They didn't know how close they came, how I walked among them, invisible, unnoticed. But it wouldn't be long before they figured it out, before they connected the dots. So I left. I drifted from place to place, never staying too long, never drawing attention. But everywhere I went, I hunted. The whispers guided me, led me to those who deserved my special brand of justice. They were everywhere, these people who thought they could get away with their cruelty, their malice. But I saw them, and I made them pay. My methods became more refined, more creative. It wasn't enough just to kill anymore. It had to be personal, intimate. I wanted them to know why they were dying, to feel the same fear, the same helplessness they had made me feel. In a small, run-down town on the outskirts of nowhere, I found my next prey. A group of teenagers, just like the ones who had tormented me. They were the local bullies, ruling the school with iron fists and cruel tongues. No one stood up to them, not even the teachers. But I watched them for days, studying their habits, learning their routines. They were arrogant, careless. They never saw me coming. It started with Danny, the leader. He was a big guy. Full of bravado, always picking on the weaker kids. I followed him one night after he left a party, drunk and stumbling. The road was dark, deserted, perfect. I waited until he was far enough from the lights of the town, then I struck. He didn't even have time to scream. I pulled him into the woods, gagging him before he could make a sound. His eyes widened in terror as he realized what was happening, but it was too late. I tied him to a tree, the rope cutting into his flesh, and laid out my tools. The whispers were louder now, urging me on, guiding my hand. I took my time with Danny. This wasn't about speed, this was about sending a message. I wanted him to suffer, to understand the pain he had caused. I started with shallow cuts, just enough to make him bleed, just enough to make him cry. His pleas for mercy fell on deaf ears. I didn't feel anything as I worked, no pity, no remorse. The whispers drowned out everything else, filling my mind with a dark, twisted joy. When I was done, Danny was nothing more than a bloody heap, barely recognizable. I left him there, a warning to the others. The next morning, the town was in chaos. They found Danny's body, or what was left of it, and panic spread like wildfire. The police were clueless, the town in lockdown, but it didn't matter. I was already planning my next move. The others were more cautious after Danny's death, sticking together, looking over their shoulders. But it didn't matter. They couldn't escape me. I picked them off one by one, each death more gruesome than the last. Sarah, the pretty cheerleader who mocked anyone she deemed beneath her, found herself tied to her bed, a gag in her mouth, as I slowly drained the life from her. Her tears only made me work slower, savoring every second of her terror. Tom, the football star, thought he was safe at home with his parents. But I waited until they were gone, until he was alone. I made it look like a home invasion, but he knew the truth as I carved my message into his flesh. One by one, they fell, each one more satisfying than the last. The town was paralyzed with fear, the police utterly useless. They had no idea who I was, no idea that the monster they were hunting was right under their noses. But there was one left, the one I had saved for last, Jessica. She was different. She wasn't just a bully, she was the mastermind, the one who orchestrated the torment. She had always been the cruelest, the most vindictive. She was the one who broke me, who turned me into what I am now, and I was going to make her suffer. I waited, biding my time, letting the fear build. Jessica knew I was coming for her. She could feel it, sense it in every shadow, every creak of the floorboards. She tried to hide, tried to run, but it was no use. The whispers wouldn't let me lose her. When I finally caught her, she was a shell of the girl she used to be. Gone was the confidence, the arrogance. All that was left was a trembling, terrified girl, pleading for her life. But it was too late for that. I took her to the place where it all began, the place where she and the others had tormented me. The abandoned warehouse at the edge of town, where no one would hear her screams, but they were as clueless as ever. They didn't know who I was, didn't know that the killer was right there among them, watching, waiting. But then something unexpected happened. Mia, Kevin's girlfriend, didn't fall apart like I expected. She didn't cower in fear or break down in tears. No, she did something I hadn't anticipated. She started asking questions, poking around, trying to figure out who had killed Kevin. She was relentless, driven by a need for revenge that mirrored my own. It was almost admirable. I watched her from the shadows, intrigued. She was smart, smarter than I'd given her credit for. She started connecting dots that no one else had noticed, started seeing patterns in the chaos. She was getting too close. The whispers told me to kill her, to silence her before she could expose me. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the fire in her eyes, the determination. Or maybe it was the emptiness, the void that I couldn't seem to fill. No matter how many lives I took, I decided to play a game with Mia. I left her clues, small hints to lead her closer to the truth. I wanted to see if she could figure it out, if she could see me for what I really was. She was good, I'll give her that. She followed the clues, piecing together the puzzle with an almost frightening precision. But she still didn't know who I was, didn't realize that the person she was hunting was right under her nose. Then came the night when everything changed. Mia had found one of my clues, a bloody scrap of Kevin's shirt hidden in her locker. She was close, so close to figuring it out. I watched as she left the school, her face pale, her eyes wide with fear and determination. I followed her, slipping into the darkness, becoming one with the night. She led me to the woods, to the place where I had left Kevin's body. It was almost poetic, returning to the scene of the crime. But Mia wasn't the only one there. A group of her friends had followed her, armed with flashlights and baseball bats. But then, something strange happened. The world tilted, the ground rushing up to meet me. The knife slipped from my grasp, clattering to the ground as darkness closed in around me. As I lay there, bleeding out in the cold, unforgiving woods, I watched Mia. Her chest heaved with exertion, blood splattered across her clothes and face. She looked like a warrior, standing over her fallen enemy. But there was something else in her eyes, something I didn't expect. Fear. Not of me, but of what she had become, the whispers had gone silent, replaced by the sound of my ragged breathing, the slow, wet pulse of blood leaving my body. I tried to move, to reach for the knife that had fallen from my grasp, but my body wouldn't respond. The pain was overwhelming, and I knew I didn't have much time left. Mia stepped closer, cautious, but determined. She kept her distance, her eyes locked on mine. "This ends here," she said, her voice trembling but filled with resolve. "You're not going to hurt anyone else." I wanted to laugh, but all that came out was a weak, rasping cough. Blood filled my mouth, choking me. I had never expected to end like this, defeated, broken, by a girl I had underestimated, but as I looked into her eyes, I saw something that gave me hope. A flicker of uncertainty, a shadow of doubt. She wasn't like me, not yet. But she was close. So close, you think, you've won. I gasped, my voice barely more than a whisper. "You'll never escape it. The darkness, it's in you now." She shook her head, but I could see the hesitation, the fear. "No. I'm not like you. I'm not a monster." "Not yet," I rasped, managing a twisted smile. "But you will be. You've tasted blood, felt the power. It's intoxicating, isn't it?" "Shut up." She screamed, but her voice cracked, betraying her. "I'm nothing like you." But she was. And deep down, she knew it. I could feel the life draining out of me, the cold seeping into my bones. I had to make her understand. The whispers might have fallen silent, but I could still hear them in the back of my mind, urging me on, demanding I finish what I started. "Kill me," I taunted, my voice weak but insistent. "End it. Or let me finish the job." She stared at me, her hands shaking. I could see the war raging inside her, the battle between who she was and what I had turned her into. "Do it." I spat, using the last of my strength to push her over the edge. "You'll never be free, unless you finish it." For a moment, I thought she would. Her grip on the knife tightened, her knuckles white, and she took a step toward me, her eyes dark with rage. But then, something in her snapped. She dropped the knife, letting it fall to the blood-soaked ground. "No," she said, her voice firm, but her eyes glistening with tears. "I'm not like you. I'm not a killer." I watched as she turned and walked away, leaving me there to die alone in the cold, empty woods. The pain was unbearable, the darkness closing in fast, but I couldn't stop smiling. She might have left me to die, but the seed had been planted. The darkness was in her now, festering, growing. It would consume her eventually, just like it had consumed me. And when it did, she would understand. She would finally see the world as I saw it. The whispers would find her, they always do. I closed my eyes, the cold finally overtaking me. My last thoughts were of Mia, and the darkness she couldn't escape. And then, everything went black, weeks passed, and the town of Stillwater tried to move on. They buried Kevin and the others. And the local paper called it a tragic mystery, a case that might never be solved. Mia was hailed as a hero, the girl who had survived the nightmare. She tried to return to normal life, to forget the horrors she had faced, but she couldn't. She started having nightmares, dark, twisted visions of blood and death. She heard voices in the night, whispers that grew louder each day, urging her to embrace what she had become. She tried to resist, tried to convince herself that it was just trauma, just the aftermath of everything she had been through, but deep down, she knew the truth. "End it. Or let me finish the job." She stared at me, her hands shaking. I could see the war raging inside her, the battle between who she was and what I had turned her into. "Do it." I spat, using the last of my strength to push her over the edge. You'll never be free, unless you finish it. For a moment, I thought she would. Her grip on the knife tightened, her knuckles white, and she took a step toward me, her eyes dark with rage. But then, something in her snapped. She dropped the knife, letting it fall to the blood-soaked ground. "No," she said, her voice firm, but her eyes glistening with tears. "I'm not like you. I'm not a killer." I watched as she turned and walked away, leaving me there to die alone in the cold, empty woods. The pain was unbearable, the darkness closing in fast, but I couldn't stop smiling. She might have left me to die, but the seed had been planted. The darkness was in her now, festering, growing. It would consume her eventually, just like it had consumed me. And when it did, she would understand. She would finally see the world as I saw it. The whispers would find her, they always do. I closed my eyes, the cold finally overtaking me. My last thoughts were of Mia, and the darkness she couldn't escape. And then, everything went black. Weeks passed, and the town of Stillwater tried to move on. They buried Kevin and the others. And the local paper called it a tragic mystery, a case that might never be solved. Mia was hailed as a hero, the girl who had survived the nightmare. She tried to return to normal life, to forget the horrors she had faced, but she couldn't. She started having nightmares, dark, twisted visions of blood and death. She heard voices in the night, whispers that grew louder each day, urging her to embrace what she had become. She tried to resist, tried to convince herself that it was just trauma, just the aftermath of everything she had been through. But deep down, she knew the truth, a whisper, soft at first, barely audible, but growing louder with each passing second. It was my voice, echoing in her mind, urging her to finish what she had started, to embrace the darkness within. Mia dropped to her knees, clutching her head, trying to drown out the sound, but it was no use. The whispers were inside her now, and they would never stop. "Do it," they urged. "You know you want to." She screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the trees, by the darkness that surrounded her. And then, everything went silent. When she opened her eyes, the knife was in her hand, the blade gleaming in the moonlight. Her breath came in ragged gasps, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't remember picking it up. Didn't remember taking it from the house. But it was there, cold and heavy in her grip, and she knew, in that moment, that she couldn't fight it anymore. The darkness had won. Mia stood up, the knife still in her hand, and walked deeper into the woods, disappearing into the shadows. She didn't know where she was going, didn't care. All she knew was that the whispers were leading her, guiding her to the next victim, and she couldn't wait to start.